So we're going to start on a low note. 8 years ago, in 2014, 3 people left my organization. This wasn't during the Great Resignation. This is an earlier time in our company, and 3 people leaving hurt. It was all within about a 3-month window. And at the time, I was like, you know what? They're all individually explainable. One person was getting their MBA. One person was moving across country. We weren't really set up for distributed work yet. One person had the opportunity to do a startup with a good friend. So I was like, no patterns here, nothing to worry about. All 3 of them were women. And we took a step back and said, is there a trend? Is there something going on here? Surely this company run by white, straight men, I don't have blind spots, would we? Like, is there something else going on? So we, in our naivety, like, well, let's do something called a culture audit. We invited an outside person to come in, talk to our alumni, talk to our people, and get a sense of what the real EX, or the employee experience of our company, was. And oh man, were there blind spots. It was the beginning of our, what we called our DEI initiative, diversity, equity, inclusion, and it really started to be the foundational changes to our employee experiences within the company. What I thought I would do today is talk about the mistakes we've made in that journey, the things we've learned, the things we've tried, and I'll give 5 maybe big insights and 2 creative approaches we've taken that you might be able to adopt or learn from, in the hopes that each of us can talk about today, the things we're doing in our own company cultures to challenge ourselves to be better. And so I'm going to organize my talk around these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When we first started this, we had this group, we kicked off our DEI initiative, and we started having discussions about privilege and bias, race and gender, and we started having discussions and workshops and would read books together. And after a couple of years of doing this, we brought in a new partner to help us come up with our first roadmap, our DEI roadmap. And we went through some training with the leadership team, and they introduced us to this model. I'll share this in the Whova app afterward in the articles to read. But it talked about the journey between being an exclusive club to being a truly welcoming organization. And they said, where do you think you are? This was years after we'd been doing this work and having company conversations, and it was sad to recognize the failures we had made. We were still in that symbolic differences period. There was a few people that were pushing this Sisyphusian boulder uphill, trying to drive the organization to make change. We hadn't made a lot of organizational systemic changes. The people that were going to these book clubs and workshops were the same people, and the rest of the organization was not doing much to adopt and to change. And we asked our coach, we said, why are we failing at this? What's causing us to not make the structural changes, to make the lasting changes we'd hope to see? I joined a group through Loyola. They had a DEI leadership cohort where I got to work with other executives and get some insight from them. And between them and the coach who was helping us through some of these transitions, they said, this is the main failure that you're driving right now. You're treating this like an initiative, not a strategy. And I was like, well, they're kind of the same thing, right? And they said, well, think about sales and marketing. You have a go-to-market strategy. And when you get bigger, that go-to-market just gets more expensive. You invest more. You think about it all the time. Like any other strategy, you have metrics, you have KPIs. You probably have outside advisors. You have training. There are all these things you do for sales and marketing. Are you doing any of that for your employee experience? And so we started thinking about this. How could we do some of the same things? We're a consulting organization, and the products that we make are used by everyone, not just straight white men. And we want to think about how we can get that diversity in the room when we're designing experiences, when we're building products. And so we started thinking about how do we give space for people to engage in this work? As a consulting company, you think about your billable time, how much time you're spending with clients. And that was one of the first changes we made, was saying the time you're spending on our DEI initiatives counts towards your client time. It's not something you have to do at nights and weekends. We then started creating a budget the same way we had a sales and marketing budget. We had a DEI budget. We could bring in speakers and bring in events. We started having days where we shut down all company work and would just focus so that there were no other distractions. We started thinking about if we've got a scorecard for sales, we've got to have a scorecard for this. And so we started actually publishing diversity reports and making them available to the public outside of our own company to help hold us accountable for change. We brought in leaders, we brought in advisors. We started treating this like a strategy. And it really started making some of the organizational changes around the company. Now, the second thing they said, the big takeaway, was to think about all aspects of your employee experience. Far too often when we think about how can we change things, we think about the candidate experience, who are we hiring, or maybe the employee experience of who works there. And the suggestion was you have to think about having the right kind of mindsets at all levels. Who are the managers in your company? Who are the leaders in your company? Who owns your company? And thinking about correcting for overrepresentation. We had that white, straight male perspective pretty well in hand. How can we get other perspectives in the room at the leadership level, at the ownership level, at the board level, and making that part of the company culture? As we started leaning into other parts of our company, there was one phrase as we talked about how do we make our systems and our tools more equitable? How do we make changes more systemic in organization? And this was the phrase that really changed a whole bunch of our company culture. Take things that are implicit and make them super explicit. So everyone has the same understanding around growth and opportunity. When we were smaller, we would say, this person's a senior designer. This person's a consultant level designer. This person's a lead developer. This person's not. Then we said, but why? What about this person is considered senior or lead? And we actually had to try to write it down. This is one of the hardest things to do, to take the things that are implicit and make them very explicit. And we got it super wrong. When we wrote it down initially, it seemed like there was one path towards growth. You had to drive revenue, or you had to be in the C-suite. You had to be like the CTO. And as we realized, humans don't grow that way. Humans have lots of things they can excel at and grow at. And so we came up with a model that looked more like this, where there's the core axis around your core skills, let's say as a designer or as a developer. But then there's horizontal axis of influence. How you influence the company, how you can influence other people, how you can be part of, we all know those people that are the glue that holds their team together. They're strong managers, they're mentors, and they build those connections within teams. That kind of emotional labor, oftentimes not recognized, not compensated for, and not part of the promotion logic. And for us, making that an explicit part of growth. If you see the teal there, all three of those are considered senior, and they're all paid the same. So whether you're a core technologist or someone who's driving more influence, they're both recognized as being valuable within the organization. And it allowed us to have a much more equitable approach to the way that we actually now drive and promote change. We actually broke LinkedIn. We made a job description that really tried to be explicit about what we expect. I think LinkedIn has a 10,000 character limit on their job descriptions, and ours were around 14,000. Because we try to be super transparent around what you're gonna get paid and what we promote for, what your experience will be, what the job application process will be. And we've heard routinely it's one of the best job descriptions that candidates have found. The last thing was around how do we make a really inclusive culture? And here I was gonna give two maybe creative ideas of things you can do to actively change. When we first started doing this, we wanted to make sure everyone's ideas were heard, not just the executive ones, but all the good ideas. When you're thinking about how do we provide really good service, you have to make sure that the best ideas are being heard. And oftentimes, especially if you think about our grumpy CTO, was very adamant about all the reasons why something wouldn't work, very knowledgeable about all the constraints, and would always shoot down other people's ideas. So we made a game. That game, and how we made our meetings, we got challenged to put it up on Kickstarter. And so we're like, let's try that. It actually got backed within about 20 days, and now we're making a game that people are using to change their own company cultures, which cracks me up. This includes, so yeah, this is a person who makes digital products for a living, making an analog card game that's now being used by hundreds of other companies. Thank you, Kickstarter. So we would give roles to people in a room. So let's say you have a junior developer who wants to challenge the assumptions of the CTO. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna smile and nod with whatever the CTO is saying, but if they can blame it on the game and say, you know what, just for today I'm gonna play devil's advocate, here's why our idea maybe won't work. And it gives them an excuse to put their ideas out on the table. The CTO, who's probably in our case, very grumpy and always knows why their ideas are the best, has to play angel's advocate and say yes and to the next half hour suggestions and build on someone else's ideas of why they actually might work. We came up with all kinds of ideas of patterns to look out for, anti-patterns, where people step on each other's toes, where they shoot down each other, where they disrupt a meeting and conversation, where the good ideas die in the vine because of the ways they are showing up in meetings. And we made a game out of it. It changed how we started having company dialogues in meetings. What I wanted to think about was how could we change our listening approach for the entire organization? And this broke during pandemic. Historically, what we would do as a largely Chicago-based organization, we could walk into the kitchen and say, what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? Like an AMA or Ask Me Anything. And that didn't work when you're all distributed. So I did probably what almost all of you would have done. The next best thing I thought was to do research. And I said, I'm going to send out a survey and say, what do you want to talk about? This is what I got back. Survey, what do y'all want to talk about? Number one thing, what are we doing with the office space? Are we getting a new office space? Are we getting rid of the old office space? Do we even need an office space? When you send out a survey, you assume that the highest mentioned thing is the most important. I'm the only one who can see all the survey results, so I take that as gospel, that this is the most frequently mentioned thing, it must be the most important. Look at the bottom right, mental health, anxiety, balance, bottom. Only 2 brave people were like, I'm going through some stuff right now, and I really wish we could talk about it. When I thought about how we could do a better job of active listening, I realized surveys are flawed. As the only one who sends it, I'm the only one who gets to see the results, and then I have to interpret to suggest what is important. So we found a tool called Thought Exchange. Thought Exchange is a different kind of listening tool where after you submit a response to this question of like, what should we be talking about, you anonymously see everyone else's answers and can upvote or downvote. Look what happened. Mental health and anxiety bumped second to the top. And people said, I didn't think about that. Or more importantly, maybe I didn't have the guts to put it out there. But now that I see that, that's where I'm putting all my chips on the table. That's what we should be talking about. Office space dropped to like 3rd or 4th on the bottom. When you think about the precious amount of time you have for synchronous communication, for company dialogue, to challenge your employee experience, to learn more about and be curious about your experience, if you're really building an inclusive culture, you want to listen to the right ideas, not just the executive ones. You want to hear the right input. And something like a thought exchange might challenge you to hear everyone's ideas and how they interact together. The idea of the inclusion cards might challenge how people are showing up in meetings to make sure the best ideas are being heard. But the goal was to be, if I go back in time and look at this, the goal is to make sure that all the ideas, not just the executive ones, are being addressed to. So why am I talking about DEI at a CX event? I think firmly that if you can really focus on your active listening skills to change the way the organization is run, if you can make access to information and to growth as equitable as possible, and if you can have the most diverse team in the room, you can build better teams. As we've heard today, the focus on teams drives accountability, drives culture, drives growth, and it drives the customer experience. You can do a better job at building a better product if you have better teams. So close.